Behind the golden gates of Buckingham Palace, where centuries of tradition meet modern scrutiny, a financial scandal was brewing that would test the very foundations of the monarchy. While the public admired the polished smiles and ceremonial waves, Prince William discovered something that made his blood run cold. Hidden bank transfers, questionable business dealings, and family loyalty colliding with royal duty. This wasn't just another tabloid headline. This was a crisis that could destroy everything the royal family had worked to rebuild. When William first saw the documents spread across his private study desk, his hands trembled slightly. The numbers didn't lie, and neither did the trail of evidence that led straight to his stepmother's family. For years, whispers had circulated in royal circles, but now he held proof that could either save the monarchy's reputation or tear his own family apart forever. The question wasn't whether he should act. It was whether he could find the courage to confront the woman his father loved, knowing that his decision would echo through history books and change the royal family forever. Some battles are fought with swords and shields. Others are fought with documents, determination, and the weight of a crown that hasn't yet touched your head but already rests heavy on your conscience. This is the story of how Prince William chose his path when loyalty and duty pointed in opposite directions, and how one man's courage to do what was right saved the institution that millions around the world still believe in. The morning mist clung to the windows of Kensington Palace as Prince William sat in his private study, surrounded by financial documents that would have made any accountant's head spin. It was barely 6 o'clock, but sleep had become a luxury he couldn't afford since discovering what lay hidden beneath years of carefully constructed royal appearances. The coffee in his mug had grown cold hours ago, forgotten among the spreadsheets and bank statements that painted a picture he wished he'd never seen. 3 weeks earlier, William had been living the relatively peaceful life of a future king, focusing on his charitable work and raising his children alongside Catherine. Then came the phone call that changed everything. Sir Michael Stevens, the keeper of the privy purse, had requested an urgent private meeting. The man's voice carried a weight that immediately put William on edge. When someone responsible for the royal family's finances sounds worried, everyone should be worried. The meeting took place in a secure room deep within Buckingham Palace, away from the curious ears of staff and the ever-present threat of hidden microphones that seemed to follow the royal family everywhere. Sir Michael had arrived with a briefcase full of documents and an expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. He placed the papers on the mahogany table between them with the care of someone handling explosives. "Your Royal Highness," Sir Michael began, his usually steady voice betraying a slight tremor, "we've uncovered some financial irregularities that require your immediate attention. These involve substantial sums of money and connections that reach very close to home." William had dealt with financial matters before, budget approvals and charity oversight, but something in Sir Michael's tone suggested this was different. As he opened the first folder, his world began to shift in ways he never could have imagined. The documents revealed a complex web of shell companies, offshore accounts, and mysterious transfers that all seemed to lead back to one family. The Parkers, Camilla's relatives who had always maintained a comfortable distance from public scrutiny, while somehow living well beyond their apparent means. The numbers were staggering. Over the past 5 years, nearly £2 million had flowed through various accounts connected to Camilla's son Tom and her daughter Laura. The money came from sources that were difficult to trace, moving through companies registered in countries known for their financial secrecy. What made William's stomach turn was the timing of these transfers. They often coincided with major royal announcements or public appearances that would have given the Parker family inside information about upcoming events. Sir Michael explained that the investigation had begun almost by accident. A routine audit of royal household expenses had revealed some unusual consulting fees paid to companies that seemed to exist only on paper. When auditors dug deeper, they found a pattern of payments that couldn't be justified by any legitimate services provided to the royal household. The trail led to a network of businesses that appeared to be profiting from their connection to the royal family in ways that violated every principle of royal conduct. William spent the next several days quietly investigating on his own, reaching out to trusted contacts in the financial world who could help him understand what he was looking at. The picture that emerged was even worse than he'd initially feared. The Parker family hadn't just been receiving questionable payments. They had been actively using their royal connections to influence business deals, recommend investments to wealthy individuals seeking royal approval, and even selling access to exclusive events where powerful people could network in proximity to the royal family. The most damaging discovery came when William found evidence that some of these schemes had been operating with Camilla's knowledge. Text messages recovered from a phone seized during an unrelated police investigation showed conversations where Camilla discussed upcoming royal events with her children, often including details that would have been valuable to anyone looking to time business announcements or investment decisions around royal activities. One particular message chain made William feel physically sick. It was from the period just before his grandmother Queen Elizabeth's final public appearance. Camilla had shared not just details about the Queen's declining health, but specific dates when announcements about her condition might be made. Tom Parker had forwarded this information to business associates who used it to time currency trades and stock transactions that netted them hundreds of thousands of pounds in profits. William realized he was looking at evidence of insider trading on a royal scale, using information about his beloved grandmother's final days to make money. The betrayal felt personal in a way that went beyond royal duty or family loyalty. This was about the dignity of a woman who had dedicated her entire life to serving her country, whose private struggles were being treated as market intelligence by people who claimed to be part of her extended family. As days turned into weeks, William found himself living a double life. During public appearances, he maintained his usual composed demeanor, shaking hands and making small talk while his mind raced with thoughts of what he knew and what he would have to do about it. At home, he struggled with whether to tell Catherine immediately or wait until he had a complete picture of the situation. The weight of the knowledge was becoming unbearable, affecting his sleep and his ability to focus on his royal duties. The hardest part was being around his father. King Charles had grown genuinely fond of Camilla's children over the years, treating them almost like his own. He often spoke proudly of Tom's business success and Laura's charitable work, completely unaware that their prosperity might be built on exploiting their connection to his family. William watched his father's face light up when talking about his stepfamily's achievements, knowing that soon he would have to destroy those illusions with the truth. Catherine noticed the change in her husband almost immediately. William had always been good at compartmentalizing the pressures of royal life, but this was different. She found him staring out windows during family dinners, distracted during conversations with their children, and lying awake at night staring at the ceiling. When she finally confronted him about it, he told her only that he was dealing with a serious royal matter that required his complete attention. The breakthrough came when William decided he needed legal advice about how to proceed. He arranged a private meeting with the royal family's most trusted solicitor, a discreet man named James Harrison who had handled sensitive matters for the monarchy for over 20 years. Harrison listened to William's presentation of the evidence with the poker face of someone who had heard many shocking things in his career, but even he seemed shaken by the scope and implications of what William had uncovered. "Your Royal Highness," Harrison said after reviewing the documents, "this is potentially criminal activity that goes well beyond matters of royal protocol or family disputes. If even half of what you've shown me can be proven in court, several people could be facing serious charges including fraud, insider trading, and money laundering." Harrison explained that William had three basic options. He could try to handle the matter privately within the family, hoping to convince those involved to stop their activities and return any ill-gotten gains. He could report the matter to the appropriate authorities and let the justice system handle it. Or he could attempt some combination of the two, giving family members a chance to come clean before involving law enforcement. William knew that whatever choice he made would have consequences that extended far beyond his own family. The monarchy's reputation had been slowly rebuilding after years of scandals and controversies. A financial corruption case involving the Queen Consort's family could undo decades of careful work to modernize and rehabilitate the royal image. Yet allowing the behavior to continue would be an even greater betrayal of the values the monarchy was supposed to represent. As he sat in his study that morning, surrounded by evidence of betrayal and greed, William made his decision. He would confront Camilla first, giving her an opportunity to explain herself and work with him to address the situation before it became public. If she refused to cooperate or tried to deny the evidence, he would have no choice but to take the matter to the authorities regardless of the consequences to his father's marriage or his own relationship with his stepmother. The clock on his desk chimed 7 times, marking another hour in what had become the longest few weeks of William's life. He carefully organized the documents into folders, each one representing a different aspect of the Parker family's financial schemes. Soon he would have to pick up the phone and request a private meeting with Camilla. The conversation that followed would determine not just the fate of his stepfamily, but the future direction of the monarchy itself. William understood that he was about to cross a line that would fundamentally change his relationships within the royal family. Once he confronted Camilla with this evidence, there would be no going back to the way things were. Either she would work with him to clean up the mess her family had created, or he would have to treat her as an adversary who had put her own interests above the good of the crown. The young prince, who had once been protected from the harsh realities of royal life, was about to make a decision that would prove whether he truly had the strength to be the king his country would need. The next few days would test every principle he had been taught about duty, family, and the sometimes conflicting demands of both. As he prepared to make the phone call that would set everything in motion, William took one last look at a photograph on his desk, a picture of him with his grandmother during his last private conversation with her before she died. In that moment, he remembered her final words to him about the importance of putting duty above personal comfort, no matter how much it might hurt. Those words would give him the strength to do what needed to be done, even if it meant confronting the woman his father loved with evidence that could destroy her family's reputation forever. The time for investigation was over. Now came the much harder task of taking action, knowing that every choice he made from this point forward would echo through the halls of royal history and determine what kind of king he would eventually become. The telephone call to arrange a private meeting with Camilla lasted exactly 47 seconds, but William felt as though time had slowed to a crawl during every moment of it. Her voice sounded cheerful and unsuspecting as she agreed to meet him for tea at Clarence's house the following afternoon. She even mentioned how lovely it would be to catch up, completely unaware that her stepson was about to present her with evidence that could destroy her family's reputation and potentially send her children to prison. William spent the night before the meeting rehearsing different approaches in his mind. Should he be direct and present the evidence immediately, or should he try to ease into the conversation and give Camilla a chance to come clean on her own? His training in diplomatic protocol suggested the latter approach, but his growing anger over what he had discovered made him want to confront her directly with the proof of her family's betrayal. Catherine watched her husband pace their bedroom like a caged animal, his usual calm demeanor replaced by nervous energy that seemed to fill the entire room. She had never seen him this agitated, not even during the most challenging public crises they had faced together. When she finally convinced him to tell her what was happening, the color drained from her face as he explained the scope of what he had uncovered. "My God, William," she whispered after he finished outlining the evidence. "If this becomes public, it won't just hurt Camilla's family. The newspapers will make it look like the entire royal family is corrupt. They'll drag your father through the mud, and everything he's worked to build since becoming king will be questioned." William knew she was right, but he also knew that doing nothing would be even worse in the long run. If the Parker family's schemes continued and were eventually exposed by outside investigators, the royal family would look either complicit or incompetent for failing to notice what was happening under their noses. Either way, the monarchy's credibility would suffer irreparable damage. The afternoon of the meeting arrived gray and drizzly, matching William's mood as he made his way to Clarence's house. The building held so many memories of happier times, family gatherings, holiday celebrations, quiet conversations with his grandmother when she was still alive. Now he was about to have a conversation that might make future family gatherings impossible. Camilla greeted him warmly, dressed elegantly as always and completely at ease in her role as queen consort. She had prepared his favorite tea and even arranged for some of the biscuits he had enjoyed as a child. The normalcy of the scene made what William was about to do feel even more surreal. They spent the first few minutes exchanging pleasantries about their families and upcoming royal engagements. Camilla mentioned how proud she was of Tom's latest business venture and Laura's expanding charitable foundation. Each comment felt like a knife twisting in William's stomach, knowing what he knew about how those ventures were actually being funded. When William finally steered the conversation toward the reason for his visit, he watched Camilla's expression carefully for any sign that she suspected what was coming. Her face showed nothing but polite interest as he mentioned some concerns that had come to his attention regarding royal family finances. She nodded sympathetically and asked if there was anything she could do to help address whatever issues had arisen. William reached for his briefcase and pulled out a folder containing copies of the most damning evidence he had collected. His hands were steadier than he had expected as he placed the documents on the coffee table between them. Camilla glanced at the papers with curiosity, still not understanding the significance of what she was looking at. "I need to show you something that I hope you can help me understand," William said, his voice carefully controlled. These are financial records that appear to show substantial payments being made to companies connected to your family. The amounts and timing of these payments have raised some serious questions. As Camilla began to examine the documents, William watched her face transform from confusion to recognition to something that might have been fear. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned the pages, seeing her own text messages reproduced alongside bank transfers and business registrations that painted a clear picture of the schemes her children had been operating. The silence in the room stretched for what felt like an eternity. William could hear the grandfather clock in the corner marking each second that passed while Camilla processed what she was seeing. When she finally looked up from the papers, her carefully maintained composure had cracked, revealing a woman who suddenly looked every one of her 76 years. "William," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I can explain some of this. It's not what it looks like." But, as she continued speaking, it became clear that her explanations only made things worse. Yes, she had shared information about royal schedules with her children, but she claimed it was just normal family conversation. Yes, Tom and Laura's businesses had been unusually successful, but she insisted that was due to their own talents and hard work. Yes, she had recommended certain business associates to wealthy friends, but she maintained that she was simply trying to help people she cared about. William listened patiently as she presented what sounded more like excuses than explanations. The evidence was too clear, the patterns too obvious for innocent explanations to suffice. When she finished speaking, he reached for another folder from his briefcase. "I'm afraid there's more," he said gently. "These documents show that some of the information you shared was used to make financial trades that netted substantial profits. The timing isn't coincidental, and the amounts involved suggest this wasn't casual family chatter." The second folder contained the evidence that William knew would be impossible for Camilla to explain away. Currency trades made minutes after she had shared information about potential changes in royal schedules. Stock purchases in companies just hours before royal endorsements were announced. Business deals that were restructured based on advanced knowledge of royal travel plans that could affect timing of major announcements. As Camilla reviewed this evidence, William saw the exact moment when she realized the full scope of what her family had been doing and how serious the legal consequences could be. Her face went pale, and she set the papers down with shaking hands. "Oh God," she said, and for the first time since William had known her, she sounded genuinely frightened. "I never realized it had gone this far. I thought Tom was just trying to impress clients by showing he had access to royal circles. I never imagined he was using the information to actually make trades." William felt a mixture of relief and sadness at her admission. Relief that she wasn't going to deny the evidence or try to claim it was all fabricated. Sadness that someone he had grown to respect and care about had allowed this situation to develop through what seemed to be a combination of naivety and willful blindness. "The question now," William said carefully, "is what we do about it. These activities are potentially criminal, and they put the entire royal family at risk. If this information becomes public without us having taken action to address it, the consequences could be devastating for everyone involved." Camilla asked how long William had known about the situation and whether he had shared the information with anyone else. When he explained that he had been investigating for several weeks and had consulted with the royal family's legal advisors, she realized how serious the situation had become. This wasn't something that could be quietly swept under the carpet or dismissed as a misunderstanding. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, and William could hear the fear and resignation in her voice. William had prepared for this moment during his sleepless nights of planning. He presented Camilla with what he considered a fair but firm set of demands. First, all questionable business activities had to stop immediately. Second, Tom and Laura would have to cooperate with an independent audit of their finances to determine exactly how much money had been obtained through improper means. Third, any profits that could be traced to insider information would have to be returned to appropriate charitable causes. Fourth, the entire family would have to agree to ongoing financial monitoring to ensure that nothing like this ever happened again. The alternative, William explained, was for him to report the matter directly to the authorities and let them conduct their own investigation. He made it clear that while he preferred to handle the situation within the family, he would not hesitate to involve law enforcement if his conditions were not met completely and quickly. Camilla's initial response was to ask for time to discuss the situation with her children and to consult with her own legal advisors. William agreed to give her 48 hours to respond, but made it clear that any attempt to destroy evidence or move assets during that time would force him to immediately contact the police. As their meeting concluded, both William and Camilla seemed emotionally drained by the confrontation. The warm family relationship they had carefully built over the years had been replaced by something much more formal and strained. William felt sorry for Camilla personally, but he also felt proud of himself for having the courage to confront a difficult situation instead of hoping it would somehow resolve itself. The drive back to Kensington Palace gave William time to process what had just happened. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Regardless of how Camilla responded to his ultimatum, their relationship would never be the same. The family dinners and casual conversations that had become a normal part of his life were probably over forever. That evening, William called Catherine from his study to tell her how the meeting had gone. She listened without interruption as he described Camilla's reactions and the demands he had made. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment before telling him how proud she was of him for doing the right thing despite the personal cost. "Your grandmother would be proud of you too," she said softly. "She always said that being royal meant making difficult choices for the greater good, even when those choices hurt people you care about." As William prepared for bed that night, he realized that the hardest part of his ordeal was still to come. In less than 2 days, he would learn whether Camilla and her family would cooperate with his demands or whether he would have to follow through on his threat to involve the authorities. Either way, he had started a process that would fundamentally change the royal family forever. The boy who had once been protected from the harsh realities of royal responsibility was now fully prepared to shoulder whatever burden his position required, regardless of the personal consequences. The next 48 hours would determine whether his family could survive the crisis he had uncovered, or whether the monarchy would face another devastating scandal that could shake its foundations. The 48-hour deadline William had given Camilla felt like the longest 2 days of his life. Every phone call made him jump, wondering if it might be her response. Every knock on his office door caused his heart rate to spike as he anticipated news about how his stepfamily would react to his ultimatum. The waiting was made worse by having to maintain his normal royal schedule, appearing at charity events and public engagements while his personal world teetered on the edge of chaos. Catherine did her best to provide support and normalcy for their family during this tense period. She kept their children's routines unchanged and deflected their questions about why Daddy seemed so distracted lately. But William could see the strain showing in her face too. She understood better than anyone how much this crisis could damage not just their immediate family, but the institution they had dedicated their lives to serving. The call finally came at 11:30 on Thursday morning. William was in his private study reviewing briefing papers for an upcoming state visit when his personal assistant informed him that Queen Consort Camilla was on the line. His mouth went dry as he reached for the phone, knowing that whatever she said in the next few minutes would determine the course of action for the coming weeks. "William," Camilla's voice sounded tired and strained, lacking its usual warmth. "I've spoken with Tom and Laura, and we've all consulted with our legal advisors. We're prepared to accept your conditions, but we need to discuss some of the practical details about how this will work." William felt a wave of relief wash over him, followed immediately by apprehension about what those practical details might involve. Agreeing to his conditions in principle was one thing, but he knew the real test would come in the implementation. People facing the prospect of returning large sums of money and submitting to ongoing financial oversight often found reasons to backtrack on their initial agreements. They arranged to meet again the following day, this time with legal representatives present for both sides. William insisted that Sir Michael Stevens, the keeper of the privy purse, also attend to ensure that any agreement reached would be properly documented and enforceable. He had learned from watching other royal crises that informal arrangements and gentlemen's agreements often fell apart when public pressure mounted. The second meeting took place in a conference room at Buckingham Palace, chosen for its security and formal atmosphere. William wanted everyone involved to understand that this was now an official royal matter, not a family dispute that could be resolved with apologies and promises. The presence of lawyers and palace officials made it clear that the stakes had escalated beyond personal relationships. Camilla arrived accompanied by a distinguished solicitor named Robert Thornton, who had a reputation for handling sensitive matters for wealthy families. Tom and Laura Parker were also present, marking the first time William had seen them since uncovering evidence of their financial schemes. Both looked uncomfortable and avoided making direct eye contact with him during the initial introductions. William began the meeting by presenting a comprehensive summary of the evidence he had gathered, making sure that everyone in the room understood the full scope of what had been discovered. The lawyers took detailed notes as he outlined the various schemes, the amounts of money involved, and the potential criminal charges that could result if the matter were investigated by outside authorities. Tom Parker, who had always struck William as confident and charismatic, seemed diminished as the evidence against him was laid out in clinical detail. When given an opportunity to respond, he offered what sounded more like a carefully prepared statement than a genuine explanation. He claimed that his business success was primarily due to legitimate skills and hard work, but acknowledged that he may have inadvertently used information gained through family connections in ways that were inappropriate. Laura Parker's response was more emotional and appeared more genuine. She admitted that she had been naive about the source of some of the funding for her charitable foundation and pledged to work with auditors to identify and return any money that had been obtained improperly. Her obvious distress seemed to affect Camilla, who reached over to hold her daughter's hand during the more difficult parts of the discussion. The negotiation of specific terms took several hours and required multiple breaks as lawyers conferred with their clients about what was legally and practically feasible. William had prepared detailed requirements, but he was willing to be flexible on timing and implementation methods as long as the core principles were maintained. All improper activities had to cease immediately, all questionable profits had to be identified and returned to appropriate charities, and ongoing financial monitoring had to be accepted by the entire Parker family. The most contentious issue turned out to be the scope of the financial audit that William was demanding. Tom and Laura's lawyers argued that a comprehensive review of their business activities would be unnecessarily invasive and could damage legitimate enterprises that had nothing to do with royal connections. They proposed a more limited audit focusing only on the specific transactions that William had identified as problematic. William refused to accept this compromise, explaining that a limited audit would leave too many questions unanswered and could create the impression that the royal family was not taking the matter seriously. He needed to be able to state with confidence that everything had been thoroughly reviewed and that no improper activities were continuing. The Parker family would have to accept some inconvenience and embarrassment as the price for resolving the situation without criminal charges. After considerable discussion, the lawyers reached an agreement on audit procedures that satisfied William's requirements while providing some protections for the Parker family's legitimate business interests. The audit would be conducted by an independent firm with extensive experience in financial investigations, and the results would be reviewed by both sides before any public statements were made about the resolution of the matter. The question of how much money would need to be returned proved even more complicated than expected. Initial calculations suggested that the Parker family had benefited by at least £800,000 from schemes that clearly violated royal protocols. However, identifying exactly which profits were directly attributable to insider information versus legitimate business activities required detailed analysis that could take weeks or months to complete. William agreed to accept an immediate return of £500,000 to demonstrate good faith, with additional payments to be made as the audit progressed and specific amounts could be calculated. The money would be donated to charities focused on financial literacy and business ethics education, ensuring that some good could come from the entire unfortunate situation. Perhaps the most difficult part of the negotiation involved ongoing monitoring and restrictions on the Parker family's future business activities. William's lawyers proposed a system that would essentially require pre-approval for any significant business decisions or investments made by Tom and Laura. The Parker family's lawyers protested that this would be impossibly restrictive and could prevent them from earning legitimate livings. After much discussion, they settled on a compromise that required quarterly reports to be submitted to the royal household's financial oversight team. Any business activities that might create conflicts of interest or appear to exploit royal connections would have to be disclosed in advance. The system would be reviewed annually to determine if the restrictions could be relaxed as trust was rebuilt. The most emotional moment of the entire meeting came when Camilla addressed William directly, setting aside the formal legal proceedings to speak from the heart. She apologized not just for her own poor judgment, but for the betrayal of trust that her family's actions represented. She acknowledged that William had been placed in an impossible position and that his response had been both appropriate and courageous. "I know this has damaged our relationship," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "And I know it may never be the same again. But I want you to understand that I'm grateful for how you've handled this situation." You could have simply reported everything to the authorities and let us face the consequences without any opportunity to make things right. William's response was measured but not cold. He explained that he had no desire to destroy anyone's life, but that he also could not allow activities that threatened the monarchy's integrity to continue. He expressed hope that the family could eventually move past this crisis, but made it clear that rebuilding trust would require sustained effort and complete transparency going forward. The meeting concluded with the signing of a detailed agreement that outlined all the terms they had negotiated. Everyone present understood that this document could potentially be used in court proceedings if any party failed to fulfill their obligations. The legal formality of the process underscored how seriously William was taking the situation and how far their family relationships had moved from their previous informal basis. As the others prepared to leave, Tom Parker requested a brief private word with William. Once they were alone, he offered a more personal apology that seemed more genuine than his earlier formal statements. He admitted that he had become caught up in trying to impress business associates and had convinced himself that sharing information was harmless networking rather than potentially criminal activity. "I never intended to hurt the royal family," he said quietly. "I suppose I got greedy and stupid, and I didn't think through the consequences of what I was doing. I'm ashamed of myself, and I'm sorry that my stupidity has caused problems for you and your father." William accepted the apology, but made it clear that words alone would not be sufficient to repair the damage that had been done. Trust would have to be rebuilt through actions over time, and there could be no margin for error going forward. Any future problems would result in immediate criminal referral without the opportunity for family intervention. The drive back to Kensington Palace gave William time to reflect on what had just been accomplished. He had successfully confronted a serious crisis and reached an agreement that protected the royal family's interests while avoiding the catastrophic publicity that would have accompanied criminal charges. But he also knew that the real work was just beginning. The agreement they had reached was only as good as the Parker family's willingness to honor it completely. Over the coming months, William would have to monitor their compliance carefully while maintaining the appearance of normal family relationships during public events. The stress of this ongoing oversight, combined with the fundamental change in their personal relationships, would test his emotional resilience in ways he had never experienced. That evening, William finally felt ready to call his father and explain what had been happening. The conversation he had been dreading for weeks could no longer be postponed. King Charles deserved to know the truth about his wife's family, and he needed to understand the actions William had taken to address the situation before word of the crisis somehow reached him through other channels. The phone call would be one of the most difficult conversations William had ever had with his father, but it was a necessary step in ensuring that the entire royal family could move forward with a clear understanding of what had happened and what measures had been taken to prevent similar problems in the future. The son who had once sought his father's protection was now prepared to protect his father from a truth that might devastate him, while ensuring that the monarchy they both served would emerge from this crisis stronger and more ethical than before. The phone call to his father was scheduled for 8 o'clock that evening, but William found himself staring at his phone for nearly 20 minutes before he could summon the courage to dial the number. How do you tell a man who has finally found happiness in his personal life that his wife's family has been exploiting their royal connections in ways that could destroy everything he has worked to build? King Charles answered on the second ring, sounding relaxed and cheerful. He had just returned from a successful state dinner with visiting dignitaries and was clearly in good spirits about how the evening had gone. The contrast between his father's mood and the news William was about to deliver made the conversation even more difficult to begin. "William, how lovely to hear from you," Charles said warmly. "I was just thinking we should plan another family gathering soon. Camilla mentioned that she had tea with you yesterday and how much she enjoyed catching up." William's heart sank as he realized that Camilla had not told his father about their confrontation or the serious allegations that had been made against her family. Either she was hoping that William might change his mind about pursuing the matter, or she was struggling with how to break such devastating news to her husband. Either way, William now had to start from the beginning in explaining a situation that his father had no idea existed. "Father, I need to speak with you about something quite serious," William began, his carefully rehearsed opening already falling apart in the face of his father's obvious happiness. "It involves Camilla's family, and I'm afraid it's not good news." The change in Charles's voice was immediate and noticeable. The relaxed cheerfulness was replaced by the focused attention of a man who had dealt with many royal crises over the years. "What's happened? Is someone hurt?" William wished it were that simple. Physical injuries heal, but the kind of damage he was about to describe could permanently scar relationships and institutional trust. He began by explaining how the financial investigation had started, being careful to emphasize that it had emerged from routine auditing rather than any specific suspicions about Camilla's family. As William outlined the evidence he had discovered, he could hear his father's breathing change on the other end of the line. The silence that followed each new revelation was more telling than any words could have been. When William finished presenting the basic facts, Charles was quiet for so long that William began to worry the call had been disconnected. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" Charles finally asked, his voice carrying a weight that suggested he already knew the answer but was hoping desperately that he was wrong. William confirmed that the evidence had been thoroughly verified and that legal experts had concluded that criminal charges would likely result if the matter were investigated by outside authorities. He explained how he had confronted Camilla and reached an agreement that would allow the family to resolve the situation privately while ensuring that all improper activities ceased immediately. Charles's next question caught William off guard. Instead of asking about the details of the financial schemes or the agreement that had been reached, he asked whether William thought Camilla had been aware of the full scope of what her children were doing. The pain in his father's voice made it clear that this was the question that mattered most to him personally. William chose his words carefully, not wanting to make the situation worse for his father than it already was. He explained that Camilla seemed to have been naive about how the information she shared was being used, but that she had clearly shared more details about royal activities than was appropriate. Whether her actions constituted willful participation or careless indiscretion was something that only she could answer honestly. The conversation that followed was one of the most difficult William had ever had with his father. Charles struggled to process the implications of what he was learning, not just for the monarchy, but for his personal life. He had waited decades to find the kind of happiness he had discovered with Camilla, and now that happiness was being threatened by revelations that called into question the judgment and integrity of her entire family. Charles asked detailed questions about the evidence William had collected and the terms of the agreement that had been reached with the Parker family. His training as a future king had taught him to separate personal feelings from institutional responsibilities, but William could hear the strain in his voice as he tried to maintain that separation while discussing his wife's family. "What do you think I should do?" Charles asked, and William realized that his father was looking to him for guidance about how to handle the personal aspects of the crisis rather than giving orders about the institutional response. William suggested that Charles should have a frank conversation with Camilla about what had happened and how they would manage the situation going forward. The agreement William had negotiated would protect the monarchy from immediate scandal, but rebuilding trust within the family would require honest communication about what had gone wrong and how to prevent similar problems in the future. Charles agreed to speak with Camilla immediately, but asked William not to share the details of their conversation with anyone else until they had time to decide together how much information needed to be shared with other family members. William understood his father's desire to control how the crisis was communicated, but he also made it clear that any attempt to minimize or cover up what had happened would force him to take more drastic action. The call concluded with Charles thanking William for handling such a difficult situation with maturity and discretion. "Your grandmother would be proud of how you've protected the family and the institution," he said quietly. "I know this couldn't have been easy for you, but you've done exactly what needed to be done." After hanging up, William felt emotionally exhausted, but also relieved that the most difficult conversation was behind him. His father now understood the situation and supported the actions that had been taken to address it. The institutional crisis was being managed effectively, even if the personal relationships involved would never fully recover. The next several weeks brought a constant stream of challenges as the agreement with the Parker family was implemented. The independent financial audit revealed even more questionable transactions than William had initially discovered, requiring additional negotiations about restitution amounts and ongoing restrictions on business activities. Each new revelation made it clearer that the family's exploitation of royal connections had been more systematic and profitable than anyone had initially realized. Tom Parker proved to be the most difficult family member to work with during this process. While he complied with the formal terms of the agreement, his attitude suggested that he saw himself as a victim of royal overreach rather than someone who had engaged in potentially criminal behavior. His lawyers frequently challenged audit findings and requested modifications to monitoring requirements that would have weakened the oversight system William had insisted upon. Laura Parker's response was more cooperative and seemed more genuinely remorseful. She provided complete access to her charitable foundation's financial records and worked actively with auditors to identify donations that might have been tainted by improper funding sources. Her willingness to take responsibility for her mistakes helped move the process forward more quickly than would have been possible otherwise. Camilla's role throughout this period was perhaps the most complex of all. She fulfilled her obligations under the agreement and cooperated with investigators. But her relationship with William became increasingly strained as the full scope of her family's activities became clear. Family gatherings became formal and uncomfortable affairs where everyone struggled to maintain the appearance of normal relationships while dealing with the underlying tensions created by the crisis. The most challenging aspect of the ongoing situation was maintaining public appearances while managing the private turmoil. William had to attend royal events alongside Camilla and her children, smiling for photographers and making small talk while knowing that they were all bound together by an agreement that could become public if any party failed to honor their commitments. The stress of this constant performance began to affect his ability to focus on his other royal duties. Catherine became William's anchor during this difficult period, providing emotional support and practical advice about managing the complex relationships involved. She helped him understand that some damage to family relationships was inevitable given the seriousness of what had happened, but that maintaining his integrity was more important than preserving artificial harmony. 3 months after the initial confrontation, William received a report from the independent auditors summarizing their findings and confirming that all required restitution had been made. The Parker family had returned nearly £1 million to various charitable organizations, and new oversight procedures were functioning effectively. From an institutional perspective, the crisis had been resolved successfully without public scandal or criminal charges. However, the personal cost of managing the situation had been higher than William had anticipated. His relationship with Camilla remained cordial but distant, lacking the warmth and genuine affection that had developed over years of family interactions. Tom and Laura Parker clearly resented the ongoing restrictions on their business activities, even though those restrictions had saved them from criminal prosecution. Most importantly, William could see that the crisis had taken a toll on his father's happiness. Charles maintained a supportive public relationship with Camilla, but the easy contentment he had enjoyed in their marriage had been replaced by a careful wariness that affected every interaction with her family. The man who had finally found personal peace in his later years now had to constantly worry about whether new problems might emerge from his wife's connections. As winter approached, William began to see signs that the immediate crisis phase was ending and that new routines were being established. The quarterly reports from the Parker family showed compliance with all monitoring requirements. Public events featuring the extended royal family proceeded without obvious tension. The media had not discovered any hint of the serious problems that had been addressed privately. Yet William knew that the long-term consequences of the crisis were still unfolding. He had proven to himself and others that he was prepared to make difficult decisions to protect the monarchy's integrity, but he had also learned that doing the right thing sometimes came with personal costs that continued long after the immediate problem was resolved. The prince, who had once focused primarily on charity work and public engagements, now found himself thinking more seriously about the kind of king he wanted to become. The crisis had taught him that royal leadership sometimes required making choices that hurt people you care about, and that protecting an institution often meant accepting damage to personal relationships. As he prepared for the next phase of his royal career, William carried with him the knowledge that he had successfully managed his first major constitutional crisis. The monarchy was stronger and more ethical because of the actions he had taken, even if the family relationships involved would never fully heal. The future king had learned that sometimes protecting what matters most requires accepting painful sacrifices. In the present point, 6 months had passed since William first confronted Camilla with evidence of her family's financial schemes, and the royal family had settled into a new normal that everyone understood, but no one discussed openly. The quarterly reports continued to arrive on schedule, showing that the Parker family was complying with all monitoring requirements. The charitable donations had been completed, and the independent auditors had signed off on their final report. From every measurable perspective, the crisis had been successfully resolved. Yet the invisible scars remained evident to anyone who knew what to look for. Family photographs from public events showed the same smiles and formal poses as always, but Those who had been present during the private confrontations could see the subtle distance that now existed between William and his stepfamily. The easy warmth that had characterized their relationships before the crisis had been replaced by polite formality that served its purpose but carried none of the genuine affection that had once been present. The most significant change was in King Charles himself. While he maintained his public support for Camilla and continued to include her children in royal family activities, those closest to him could see that something fundamental had shifted in his demeanor. The contentment and peace he had found in his marriage had been replaced by a more guarded approach to family relationships. He still loved his wife, but the absolute trust that had characterized their partnership had been damaged in ways that might never fully heal. William found himself reflecting on these changes during a private meeting in his study at Kensington Palace. He was reviewing the latest quarterly report from the Parker family when Catherine joined him, carrying 2 cups of tea and wearing the expression she reserved for serious conversations about family matters. "Do you ever regret how you handled the situation?" she asked, settling into the chair across from his desk. The question had been haunting William for months, but he had avoided examining it too closely because he was afraid of what his answer might reveal about himself and his priorities. Now, with the immediate crisis behind them and clear evidence that his approach had achieved its intended goals, he felt ready to give Catherine an honest response. "I regret that it was necessary," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "I regret that people I care about were involved in activities that put our family and the monarchy at risk. I regret that my father's happiness has been affected and that our family relationships will never be quite the same again." He paused to sip his tea and gather his thoughts before continuing. "But I don't regret the actions I took to address the situation. If I had ignored the evidence or tried to handle it more gently, we could be facing a much worse crisis today. The monarchy's credibility and my father's reputation could have been destroyed if this had become public without us having taken appropriate action." Catherine nodded, understanding the complex emotions that her husband was struggling to process. She had watched him grow and mature throughout their marriage, but the past 6 months had marked a fundamental transition in his development as a future leader. The prince who had once relied primarily on his charm and goodwill to navigate royal responsibilities had proven that he was prepared to make difficult decisions that required genuine courage. "Your grandmother would be proud of you," Catherine said gently. "She always said that the hardest part of royal duty was making choices that hurt people you care about for the sake of principles you can't compromise." William thought about his grandmother's words, which had guided him throughout the crisis. Queen Elizabeth had faced many difficult situations during her long reign, and she had always emphasized that personal feelings could not be allowed to override institutional responsibilities. The lesson had been painful to apply when it involved his own family, but William now understood why she had considered it so important. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the study door. William's private secretary entered to inform him that Tom Parker was requesting a private meeting. It would be the first time they had spoken one-on-one since the formal agreement had been signed, and William felt a familiar knot of tension form in his stomach as he considered what Tom might want to discuss. The meeting was scheduled for the following afternoon at Buckingham Palace, chosen because its formal setting would emphasize the official nature of their ongoing relationship. William wanted to make it clear that while the crisis had been resolved, the underlying dynamic between them had changed permanently. Tom was no longer just his stepbrother attending family gatherings. He was someone whose business activities would be subject to royal oversight for the foreseeable future. Tom arrived precisely on time, looking more subdued than William had ever seen him. The confident entrepreneur who had once dominated family conversations with stories of his business successes seemed diminished, carrying himself with the careful restraint of someone who understood that his actions were being scrutinized and judged. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," Tom began, his voice lacking its usual assertive tone. "I wanted to speak with you about the possibility of modifying some of the monitoring requirements in our agreement." William had expected this conversation eventually. The quarterly reporting system and pre-approval requirements for significant business decisions were functioning effectively, but he knew they were also burdensome for someone trying to operate legitimate enterprises. Tom had complied with all requirements for 6 months, and his recent reports showed no questionable activities or concerning patterns. However, William was not prepared to make any immediate changes to the oversight system. The agreement they had negotiated was designed to rebuild trust gradually over time, and 6 months of compliance was not sufficient to demonstrate that the underlying problems had been permanently resolved. More importantly, Any appearance that the royal family was relaxing its vigilance could create the impression that they had not taken the original violations seriously enough. I understand that the current requirements create some inconvenience for your business operations, William replied diplomatically. But the agreement we reached was designed to restore confidence that all royal family connections are being handled appropriately. That rebuilding process takes time, and it requires sustained demonstration of proper conduct. Tom's response revealed both frustration and resignation. He acknowledged that the monitoring system was functioning as intended, but argued that the ongoing restrictions were preventing him from pursuing legitimate opportunities that had nothing to do with royal connections. Some potential business partners were reluctant to work with someone whose activities were subject to external oversight, even when that oversight was being conducted discreetly. William listened sympathetically, but remained firm in his position. The agreement they had reached represented a compromise that allowed Tom and his family to avoid criminal prosecution while protecting the royal family's reputation. Modifying that agreement too quickly could undermine its credibility and create the impression that royal oversight was not seriously enforced. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with Tom presenting various proposals for reducing the scope or frequency of the monitoring requirements. William considered each suggestion carefully, but ultimately concluded that it was too early to make substantial changes to a system that was working effectively. Trust had to be earned through consistent behavior over a longer period, and 6 months of compliance was just the beginning of that process. As the meeting concluded, Tom made one final request that surprised William with its personal nature. He asked whether there was any possibility of rebuilding the family relationship that had existed before the crisis, acknowledging that his actions had damaged trust, but expressing hope that forgiveness might eventually be possible. William's response was honest, but not encouraging. He explained that while he harbored no personal animosity toward Tom, their relationship had been fundamentally changed by what had happened. The easy family dynamic of the past had been based on assumptions about trust and shared values that could no longer be taken for granted. Building a new relationship would require time, consistent behavior, and a realistic acceptance of how the crisis had affected everyone involved. After Tom left, William spent some time reflecting on how much his perspective on family relationships had evolved over the past months. He had learned that loving someone and trusting them completely were not the same thing, and that protecting people sometimes required maintaining boundaries that felt uncomfortable but served important purposes. The evening brought a phone call from his father, who had heard about the meeting with Tom and wanted to understand what had been discussed. William provided a summary of the conversation and his reasons for maintaining the existing oversight requirements. Charles supported his son's position, but also expressed hope that the family might eventually find a way to move past the crisis and rebuild damaged relationships. "I know this has been harder on you than on any of us," Charles said quietly. "You were the one who had to discover the truth and take action when the rest of us were blind to what was happening. That's a burden that no son should have to carry for his family. But you handled it with wisdom and courage that I'm not sure I would have possessed at your age." The recognition from his father meant more to William than he had expected. Throughout the crisis, he had second-guessed many of his decisions and wondered whether there might have been better ways to handle such a complex situation. Hearing that his father respected the choices he had made provided validation that he was developing the judgment and strength of character needed for his future role as king. As William prepared for bed that night, he realized that the crisis had taught him valuable lessons about leadership that would serve him throughout his life. He had learned that doing the right thing often requires accepting personal costs that continue long after the immediate problem is resolved. He had discovered that protecting an institution sometimes means making decisions that hurt people you care about. Most importantly, he had proven to himself that he possessed the courage to make difficult choices when the stakes were high enough to demand them. The future king who would eventually wear the crown had passed his first major test of character and judgment. The monarchy was stronger because of the actions he had taken, even though the family relationships involved might never fully recover. William understood now that this was often the price of effective leadership, the willingness to accept personal sacrifice in service of larger principles and responsibilities. 6 months after the crisis began, William could see that his approach had achieved its primary goals. The Parker family's questionable activities had ceased, appropriate restitution had been made, and effective oversight procedures were in place to prevent future problems. The royal family's reputation had been protected from a scandal that could have caused lasting damage to the monarchy's credibility. More importantly, William had demonstrated that the next generation of royal leadership would be prepared to make difficult decisions when circumstances required them. The prince who had once been shielded from the harsh realities of royal responsibility had proven that he was ready to shoulder whatever burdens his position might require, regardless of the personal cost. As he looked toward the future, William carried with him the knowledge that he had successfully navigated his first major constitutional crisis. The experience had been painful, and its effects would continue for years to come, but it had also provided him with confidence that he could handle whatever challenges his role as future king might present. The monarchy would survive and thrive under his eventual leadership because he had already proven that he would choose duty over comfort when the stakes demanded it.